That night, the streets were quiet, dimly lit by the flickering glow of old lamps. A young black man drove steadily through the neighborhood, his hands firm on the wheel, his eyes sharp, focused. To anyone watching, he was just another driver, making his way home. But behind him, a patrol car had been tailing him for several minutes. The officer inside claimed he noticed a suspicious vehicle, though the car was moving within the speed limit, obeying every single law. Eventually, with flashing lights cutting through the silence, the officer pulled the young man over. The tension was instant. A routine traffic stop for one person, but for this driver, it was a sudden moment where fear and uncertainty filled his chest. He kept his hands visible on the steering wheel, his voice calm when he said, "Good evening, officer." But calmness wasn't enough. The officer, visibly agitated, ordered him out of the car without explanation, his tone sharp, filled with authority that masked a dangerous bias. The young man complied, his voice steady though his heart raced. He had done nothing wrong, yet he felt the weight of history pressing against him. The officer questioned him harshly, accused him of acting suspicious, and even suggested the car might not be his. When the driver reached for his license and registration, he did so slowly, carefully, making sure every movement could be seen. Still, suspicion escalated into hostility. Within minutes, the officer declared he was under arrest. The handcuffs clicked shut, the cold metal digging into his wrists, while the young man asked calmly, "May I please explain who I am?" But the officer wasn't listening. In his eyes, this wasn't the governor's son. It was just another black man he believed he had authority over. The arrest was forceful, public, and humiliating. And yet the young man held back his anger, determined not to make the situation worse. When they reached the station, everything changed. The officer filled out the paperwork with smug confidence, until another senior officer walked in, saw the name on the record, and froze. He looked at the young man, then back at the arrest report. "This is the governor's son," he whispered, disbelief spreading across the room. The realization hit the officer like a storm. He had arrested the son of the most powerful leader in the state without cause, without evidence, purely out of prejudice. Suddenly, the tone shifted. Apologies replaced accusations, but the damage had already been done. Word spread quickly. The governor arrived at the station himself, his face a mix of fury and heartbreak. Looking at his son in cuffs, he turned to the officers and demanded answers. "Is this how you treat the people you swore to protect? If this can happen to my son, what happens to those who have no power, no name, no protection?" His words silenced the room, exposing the painful truth of systemic injustice. The charges were dropped immediately, but the governor did not let the incident disappear quietly. Instead, he used the moment to bring national attention to the deep flaws within the justice system. The young man, his son, chose not to carry bitterness, but strength. He spoke out, saying, "I don't want this story to just be about me. I want it to be about everyone who doesn't have a father in power to fight for them." His calm resilience inspired countless others. And that's what Struggles to Strength is about, turning pain into purpose, turning injustice into fuel for change. If stories like this move you, if you believe the world needs to hear the struggles and the strength behind them, then subscribe to this channel, share this video, and join our community. Because every story matters, and together, we can turn struggles into strength. That night, the streets were quiet, dimly lit by the faint orange glow of old street lamps. A young black man drove steadily, keeping to the speed limit, his hands firm on the wheel. Behind him, however, a patrol car had been tailing for several minutes. The officer inside claimed he noticed something suspicious, though there was nothing unusual at all. Suddenly, the flashing red and blue lights cut through the silence. The driver pulled over, his heart racing with the heavy weight of uncertainty. He kept his hands clearly on the wheel, his voice calm when he greeted the officer. But calmness didn't matter. The officer's tone was sharp, commanding, and filled with suspicion. Without giving a reason, he ordered the young man out of the car, treating him as though guilt was already proven. The driver complied, every movement slow and careful, but the tension only grew. Moments later, the cold snap of handcuffs closed, around his wrists. At the station, the officer processed the arrest with confidence, writing down details as if another case had been closed. But everything shifted when a senior officer glanced at the paperwork and recognized the name. Shock spread across his face as he whispered, "Do you realize who this is? This is the governor's son." The room went silent. The arresting officer froze, disbelief in his eyes, as the weight of his mistake crashed down. Soon, the governor himself arrived at the station, fury and pain in his voice as he demanded answers. He looked at his son in handcuffs and then at the officers. "If this can happen to my son, with his name and protection, what about every young man who has no one to speak for him?" His words were sharp, exposing a truth too often ignored. The injustice wasn't rare, it was constant, and this was only one story among many. The charges were erased immediately, but the humiliation and fear could not be undone. The governor's son, however, chose not to remain silent. Standing before cameras and reporters, his voice steady but filled with emotion, he said, "I don't want this to be just about me. I want it to be about every person who lives in fear, who gets stopped, searched, or arrested simply for the color of their skin. I was lucky because of who my father is. Most are not." His words carried power far beyond the room, sparking debates, protests, and demands for change. For him, the night of fear became a story of strength, one that shed light on the reality so many others endure silently. This is not just a story of injustice, but of resilience, a reminder that every struggle has the power to become strength, that silence can turn into a voice that echoes across generations. And as you hear this story, remember there are countless others untold, waiting to be heard. If you believe in these stories, if you want to stand against injustice and turn pain into purpose, then join us here at Struggles to Strength. Subscribe, share, and be part of this journey, because together we can transform struggles into strength. And though the incident eventually faded from the headlines, its echoes remained. The young man carried the memory not as a scar, but as a lesson, a constant reminder of how fragile dignity can be when bias takes control. He continued to speak out, not only because of what happened to him, but because of what happens every day to those without privilege, without witnesses, without justice. He reminded the world that silence allows cycles of injustice to continue, but courage, even from one voice, can begin to break them. Communities began to rally, conversations about reform gained strength, and people who once felt invisible started to believe that change was possible. The officer who made the arrest faced disciplinary action, but beyond punishment, the story sparked something deeper: reflection. It forced people inside the system to ask themselves whether they were protectors or enforcers, whether their duty was rooted in justice or prejudice. For many, the answer was uncomfortable, but it was necessary. The governor's son became a symbol, not of privilege, but of the uncomfortable truth that no one is truly safe until everyone is safe. His courage to use his experience not for anger, but for advocacy, showed the true meaning of turning a struggle into strength. And now, as you sit with this story, ask yourself what it teaches you. Injustice anywhere is a warning everywhere. This was not just about a single night or a single arrest. It was about the power of awareness, the courage to speak, and the will to demand something better. At Struggles to Strength, these are the stories we tell, because every story has the power to inspire change. So don't just listen. Stand with us. Subscribe to this channel, share this message, and let's make sure no struggle is forgotten and every strength is celebrated. Together, we rise. The son himself would often look back on that night, remembering the cold steel of the cuffs and the way strangers' eyes pierced through him as if he were already guilty. But he also remembered the moment he chose not to let bitterness consume him. Instead of allowing fear to harden into silence, he let it sharpen his purpose. He spoke in schools, in community halls, and at rallies, telling young people that strength isn't the absence of struggle. It is born from it. His story became a mirror for so many who had been ignored, a reminder that they were not alone and that their voices, too, could rise against injustice. As months passed, the story spread beyond the state, crossing borders, making headlines across nations. What had begun as an act of prejudice on a quiet night became a spark for reform conversations in police departments and government chambers alike. The governor, standing beside his son, pledged not just as a father, but as a leader, that this would not be forgotten. And yet, more powerful than his words was the example his son set, choosing to build bridges where others might build walls, choosing resilience instead of resentment, choosing strength where there had been struggle. That night was more than a single event. It was a turning point, a reminder that every unjust act carries within it the possibility of awakening, of transformation, of strength rising from the ashes of pain. And as this story closes, let it serve as a promise. The fight for justice is never just about one person, but about all of us. Every voice matters, every story carries power, and every struggle has the potential to become strength. If you believe in that promise, if you want to walk this journey with us, then join our family here at Struggles to Strength. Like, share, and subscribe, because together we will not only tell these stories, we will become the change they call for. And so, the memory of that night became more than just a chapter in one man's life. It became a movement, a living testimony to the resilience of a community that had endured far too much for far too long. The governor's son refused to let the story end with sympathy alone. He challenged people to see beyond the headlines, to understand that the true tragedy was not simply his wrongful arrest, but the countless lives that never made the news, the countless voices silenced before they could be heard. His courage gave those voices an echo, and his strength gave others permission to speak their truth. The lesson was clear. No position, no title, no family name could shield someone from prejudice. But when that prejudice was exposed, it had the power to awaken those who had chosen comfort over confrontation. From town halls to television screens, his story forced people to face the uncomfortable reality that justice is not truly justice until it belongs to everyone. And slowly, cracks began to form in the walls of silence that had long protected. Discrimination. For every person who listened, for every person who shared, the struggle turned into a ripple of strength. This is why stories matter. They remind us, they connect us, and they push us toward change. The arrest of a governor's son could have ended as just another headline, but instead, it became proof that even in the darkest of moments, there is a chance for transformation. His struggle was not wasted. It became strength, not just for himself, but for all who saw their own reflection in his experience. And that is why we tell these stories here, because silence keeps chains in place, but storytelling breaks them. So stay with us, keep listening, and keep sharing. At Struggles to Strength, we believe that no story is too small, and no voice should ever be lost. Together, we rise higher. Together, we grow stronger. And together, we turn struggles into strength.